We live in an age of noise, not the noise of traffic or machinery, though there is plenty of that, but a more pervasive, more insidious kind. The noise of the desperate need to be heard. The noise of the continuous performance of self, broadcast across every available channel to anyone willing to pay momentary attention. The noise of the endless search for the external validation that has become, for so many people, the primary metric by which they assess whether their existence is registering as real. Every platform, every feed, every notification is organized around a single psychological mechanism: the approval signal, the like, the comment, the share, the cheap, immediate, neurologically potent confirmation that someone, somewhere, noticed, that you spoke, and the world responded, that you exist, and the evidence is quantifiable. And into this environment, into this relentless, exhausting, thoroughly normalized addiction to external affirmation, the most radical and most countercultural thing a person can bring is silence. Not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, not the silence of someone who has been silenced, but the deliberate, strategic, psychologically sophisticated silence of someone who has understood something about the relationship between words and power that most people in the noise have never stopped long enough to examine. Every word that leaves your mouth is either an anchor pulling you to the bottom or a catapult launching you toward the summit. The way you speak, the way you think, and above all, the way you choose not to speak, these are not peripheral features of your life. They are among the most consequential powers you possess. Real empire, the kind built not of territory but of genuine psychological sovereignty, does not begin with the conquest of external terrain. It begins with the conquest of the most complex, most treacherous, most rewarding territory available, the human mind. Your own, first, and then, from that foundation, the minds of those around you. 5 principles, 5 dimensions of the power that lives in silence, in strategic withdrawal, in the disciplined management of what you say, what you reveal, and what you choose to keep. 1. Silence as a strategic weapon. There is a common misunderstanding about what silence communicates. Most people, operating from the assumption that communication is primarily verbal, and that presence is demonstrated through speaking, experience silence as absence, as the failure to engage, the reluctance to contribute, the passivity of someone who has nothing to offer or lacks the confidence to offer it. This misunderstanding is not accidental. It is the product of a culture that has systematically trained its members to equate volume with value, to interpret verbal output as evidence of intelligence and engagement, to feel the social pressure to fill every silence with something, anything, rather than allow the discomfort of the unoccupied space. And this training produces, in those who absorb it without examination, a very specific vulnerability: the uncontrolled mouth, the reflexive, continuous verbal output of someone who has never developed a practice of silence is, in the most precise metaphorical sense, an open wound. It bleeds constantly, and what it bleeds is information about your emotional state, about your insecurities, about your positions and your intentions and the specific things that affect you, about your need for approval and your anxiety about others' assessments, about everything that, if you had chosen to hold it rather than release it, would have remained yours alone, unknown, and therefore unavailable to be used against you. The person who speaks everything they know, as soon as they know it, has, in any environment where information has strategic value, voluntarily disarmed themselves. They have given the most complete possible map of their interior to everyone in their environment, including those who have no particular interest in their well-being and those who have active interest in their vulnerability. The genuinely powerful person does not need to continuously narrate themselves. They do not require the validation of others' responses to feel secure in what they know and who they are. Their presence in a room is not established through the volume of their contribution, but through the quality of their attention, the precision of their occasional words, and the specific gravity of someone who is clearly processing more than they are releasing. Words, in this framework, are not free. They have a cost, the cost of the information they carry, the impressions they create, the expectations they generate. And the discipline of silence is, among other things, the practice of ensuring that the cost is always worth paying, that when you do speak, you speak with the full weight of having chosen to, not from compulsion, not from anxiety, not from the reflexive filling of silence, but from genuine assessment that what you are about to say is more valuable than the silence it replaces. That discipline, consistently practiced, changes the way you are perceived with remarkable speed. The person who speaks less but speaks with evident intention, who chooses their words with visible deliberateness, who allows silence where others would rush to fill it. Read, almost universally, as someone who knows more than they are saying, as someone in possession of something that has not yet been revealed, as someone worth attending to. That perception is power, and it costs nothing but the discipline of keeping your mouth closed when your anxiety is telling you to open it to building goals and darkness and secrecy. There is a particular form of self-sabotage so common, so socially normalized, and so psychologically understandable that most people never recognize it as sabotage at all. It is the habit of announcing your intentions before you have fulfilled them. The new project, the ambitious goal, the significant change you have decided to make. You tell people about it, not because you need their help, not because their involvement is required, but because the telling itself produces something that feels, in the moment, very much like progress. The enthusiasm in their response, the social reality that now exists around what was previously only an internal aspiration, the accountability that the announcement creates, which feels like commitment, but is actually something importantly different. Here is what the psychology actually reveals about this pattern. When you announce an intention to others and they respond with enthusiasm or acknowledgement when the social reality of the goal has been established, your brain receives a reward signal that is similar to the signal it would receive if you had actually accomplished the goal. The identity shift you were pursuing through the achievement has occurred, in a diluted form, through the announcement. You have told them you are the person who does this thing. They have responded as if you are. The brain has registered a version of the arrival, and what follows, reliably, is a reduction in the urgency and the hunger that was driving the pursuit, because the psychological engine of ambitious action is in significant part the gap between who you are and who you are becoming. The announcement collapses that gap prematurely, incompletely, but sufficiently to reduce the fuel available for the actual work. You have marketed the roof of a house whose foundation has not yet been dug, and the marketing has consumed some of the energy that was needed for the excavation. The alternative end, it requires a genuine reorientation away from the social validation that the announcement provides, is to build in the dark, to hold your most significant aspirations and transformations in the private interior, protected from the external atmosphere, not because the external world is hostile, but because the most sacred and the most alive processes are vulnerable in their early stages to exactly the kind of casual contact that social announcement provides. A seed does not announce its intention to become a tree. It does not seek confirmation that the soil approves of its direction. It simply puts down roots, in the dark, in the silence, with the patient intensity of something that knows exactly what it is becoming and requires nothing from the surface world until it is ready to emerge. Your most significant growth deserves the same protection. Not forever. The tree eventually rises into full visibility, and the work eventually produces results that speak for themselves. But during the period of formation, during the early and fragile stages, when the direction is being established and the discipline is being built, the protection of secrecy is not merely acceptable, it is strategic. Build in silence. Let the results announce themselves, and reserve the celebration of your achievements for the noble solitude of someone who has discovered that the witness they most needed was always internal. 3. Reprogramming the mental narrative and the inner voice. Every human being lives inside a story, not a metaphorical story, an actual, continuous running narrative about who they are, what they are capable of, what they deserve, what is possible for them, and what is not. This narrative is constructed from the accumulated weight of experience, of messages received and absorbed, of conclusions drawn often in childhood, often under conditions of limited perspective and limited power about the nature of the self and the nature of the world. Most people have never examined this narrative. It runs in the background of consciousness like software that was installed long ago and has never been updated, shaping perception, filtering possibility, generating the internal commentary that accompanies every experience and every decision. And because it is so continuous, so familiar, so woven into the ordinary texture of inner experience, it is experienced not as a story, but as reality, not as an interpretation of the self, but as the self, the person who has absorbed, from whatever combination of experience and environment, the message that they are not capable, not intelligent enough, not talented enough, not fortunate enough, not the kind of person to whom significant things happen, lives inside. That message, as though it were a fact about the world rather than a story about themselves, They encounter every new challenge through the lens of this story. Every difficulty confirms it. Every setback reinforces it. Every moment of genuine potential is filtered through a narrative that has already, in advance, determined the outcome. Your mind is an army. It executes the commands it is given with the full force of its considerable capacity. If you tell it that it has already lost, that the battle is over before it has begun, that the territory being contested is beyond your reach, the army lays down its weapons, not from laziness or cowardice, but from genuine obedience to the command it received. This is not merely motivational metaphor. It is the description of an actual psychological mechanism. The internal narrative shapes attention, determining what you notice and what you filter out. It shapes interpretation, determining what experiences mean and what conclusions they support. It shapes behavior, determining what you attempt and what you avoid before the attempt. And behavior, repeated, shapes results. The story, running invisibly beneath the surface of conscious experience, generates the outcomes that confirm it, not because the story was accurate to begin with, but because it was believed. That the reprogramming of this narrative is not the work of positive affirmation, the mechanical repetition of desired self-descriptions that the deeper layers of the mind do not believe. It is more demanding and more genuine than that. It is the practice of catching the story as it runs, noticing the internal commentary in real time, particularly in moments of challenge or failure, and introducing an alternative with a specific, honest quality that the mind can actually absorb. Not, I can do anything. The mind knows this is not true and will reject it. But I haven't reached that yet, and I'm still moving. Not the performance of certainty you do not feel, but the honest acknowledgement of where you are, combined with the genuine commitment to continued direction. Every word you whisper to yourself is either a wrecking ball, demolishing the old self, or a brick building the new one. The choice of which to deploy in any given moment is always available, and the practice of making that choice consciously, of becoming the deliberate author of the story running inside you rather than its unconscious subject, is among the most significant forms of power available for purging the ego's noise. Listening with the soul. There is a quality of listening that most people never experience, because the conditions required for it are conditions that the ego finds deeply uncomfortable. Genuine listening, the kind that actually takes in what is being offered rather than processing it through the filter of what you already believe, already know, already intend to say in response, requires the temporary suspension of the ego's agenda. The agenda to be right, the agenda to be seen as intelligent or knowledgeable or insightful, the agenda to have the next response ready before the current communication has finished arriving, the agenda to confirm what you already believe rather than to encounter something that might require you to revise it. Most conversations, examined honestly, are not exchanges of genuine attention. They are alternating monologues, one person speaking while the other prepares to speak, the appearance of listening maintained while the substance of it is largely absent. Each party is primarily present to their own thoughts, their own responses, their own performance in the interaction. The other person is not really being heard. They are being waited out. This pattern is so pervasive that most people have simply accepted it as the nature of conversation. But it is not the nature of conversation. It is the nature of ego-driven conversation, the specific form that communication takes when the primary concern is self-presentation, rather than genuine encounter. The person who has developed the capacity for genuine listening, who can sit in a conversation with the ego's agenda suspended, attending to what is actually being communicated rather than managing their own performance, occupies a position of extraordinary advantage, because people can feel the difference. Not always consciously, not always with the ability to articulate what is different, but in the presence of genuine listening, something shifts. The speaker goes deeper than they would have otherwise. The conversation reaches terrain it would not have found in the usual alternating monologue. And the person listening, the one who chose genuine attention over the performance of intelligence, learns things that the person busy preparing their response never could, about how the other person actually thinks, about what actually matters to them beneath the surface presentation, about the specific texture of their concerns and their desires and their vulnerabilities, about everything that becomes visible when you are actually paying attention rather than waiting for your turn. Deep listening is, among other things, a form of strategic superiority, not deployed with calculation. The moment it becomes calculated, it stops being genuine, and the non-genuine version does not produce the same results. but the person who has developed this capacity as a genuine practice, who actually prefers understanding to being understood, who finds the interior of other people genuinely interesting rather than merely useful. That person navigates every interaction from a position of informational richness that the ego-driven talker never achieves. When you do speak after that quality of listening, from that depth of actual understanding, your words carry a weight that words spoken from the ego's agenda simply cannot match, because they arise from genuine comprehension rather than from the anxious need to establish your intelligence. And the difference is audible. Every word lands differently when it was chosen from a place of real understanding rather than released from a place of performance. 5. Liberation from the compulsion to explain. There is a particular form of psychological captivity that presents itself as reasonableness, as good communication, as the mature and responsible practice of helping others understand your decisions and your direction. It is the compulsion to explain yourself, not the genuine, generative sharing of your thinking with people who have earned your trust and whose understanding genuinely serves something, but the anxious, compulsive justification of your choices to people who have not earned that access and whose understanding you are not honestly pursuing. You are pursuing their approval. The explanation is not communication. It is supplication, a request, dressed in the language of information, for the permission to continue doing what you have already decided to do. Recognizing this pattern clearly is one of the more comfortable aspects of genuine self-examination, because the compulsion to explain is so thoroughly normalized, and because the alternative, making choices without justifying them to those who question them, feels, in the cultural context most of us inhabit, like arrogance, like the behavior of someone who doesn't care about others' perspectives or consider themselves answerable to anyone. But examine what actually happens in the moment of compulsive explanation. You have made a decision difficult, genuinely considered, aligned with your own honest assessment of what your life requires. And then someone, perhaps someone who does not understand your path, perhaps someone whose understanding was never available, regardless of how clearly you explained, perhaps someone whose approval you have been organizing your behavior around for years, expresses doubt or disapproval, and you begin to explain. Not because the explanation will actually produce understanding in most cases, you already know it won't, but because the alternative standing in your choice without the scaffolding of their comprehension, bearing the discomfort of their disapproval without resolving it, is more anxiety-inducing than the effort of justification. This is the captivity, not the disapproval itself, but the inability to bear it without responding, the organization of your behavior around making it go away, the slow, accumulative surrender of your own direction to the management of others' perceptions of that direction. The person of genuine integrity, the person with genuine backbone, as the original text so precisely puts it, does not require others' comprehension to continue walking their chosen path. They hear the doubt, they acknowledge it internally, with whatever genuine consideration it actually deserves, and then they continue, not because they are indifferent to others' perspectives, not because they are infallible, but because they have understood something fundamental about the relationship between external approval and internal direction. These two things are not the same. They are not always compatible, and when they conflict, the person who consistently chooses the former at the expense of the latter has, over time, surrendered the authorship of their own life. When your capacity is questioned, you do not answer with words. You answer with the transformation itself, with the results that accumulate from the direction you held without permission, the work you did without applause, the choices you made without approval. This is the most eloquent response available. It requires no explanation, invites no debate, and cannot be argued with. It simply is the undeniable, self-evident reality of someone who walked their chosen path so completely and maintained their direction so thoroughly that what they have become constitutes its own answer to every question that was ever raised about whether they should. We have explored today 5 dimensions of the most underestimated power available to any human being, the power that lives not in what you say but in what you choose not to say, not in what you reveal but in what you protect, not in the external noise that surrounds you but in the quality of the silence you can create within it. Silence as strategic discipline, the practice of speaking only when words exceed the value of silence. Secrecy as protection, the wisdom of building in the dark, away from the premature exposure that dissipates the energy of genuine formation. The reprogramming of the internal narrative, the daily practice of choosing Consciously, the story you tell yourself about who you are and what is possible. The development of genuine listening, the suspension of the ego's agenda in favor of actual comprehension, and the liberation from the compulsion to explain, the discovery that your choices do not require others' permission to be valid. These 5 practices, developed consistently and applied with genuine discipline, do not merely improve your performance in specific contexts, they change the fundamental quality of how you inhabit your own life. They convert the relationship between your inner world and the external noise from one of reactive dependence to one of genuine sovereignty. The empire you are building, the real one, the one that matters, is not built of territory or recognition or the accumulated approval of those around you. It is built of the quality of mind you develop in the silence, the consistency of direction you maintain in the dark, the depth of self-knowledge you acquire when the noise has been turned down far enough to hear what is actually present. Build it in silence, with discipline, without explanation, and let what you become speak with the eloquence that only genuine transformation can produce. The most powerful words you will ever speak are the ones you chose not to say. Master the silence, and everything else will follow.